All right. Hello there, everyone. This is Mr. Brass, and today I am here with Nick Peters, and we're going to be talking about his journey, autism, stuff about Christianity, and the like. Now, for the audience that doesn't know who you are, Nick, uh, tell them about you.
Well, I'm 41. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm a graduate of Johnson University, and I'm getting ready to start at Colorado Christian University working on my master's. I've been studying apologetics for over 2 decades. I am on the spectrum. I'm an avid gamer, especially things like Final Fantasy and Legend of Zelda. And of course, oh yeah, I do blog at deeperwatersapologetics.com. I've got a YouTube channel, and of course, I do affirm the virgin birth.
Yeah, I I know that is a, that is sort of a trope I've actually seen you do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how I originally came to know you is I seen you do voiceover work on Tecton TV with James
Mm-hmm.
Patrick Holding.
Yeah.
Um, how did that sort of relationship come about?
Well, JP and I think we originally connected through Theology Web, and now he and I each both have our own personal sections on Theology Web. And one time I had a friend in Florida who was getting married, and he wanted me to be a part of his wedding. And JP and his wife live in that area as well. And I contacted them and asked, hey, would it be fine if I stayed with you? And they said, sure. And we've had a great friendship ever since. He also sees me as his ministry partner. So we work together in that way. All people he's worked with, he chose me to be one who he'd share his ministry with.
That is very interesting. I also had the pleasure of doing voiceover work for JP Holding on a episode, and you know, I thought it came out good. I always, it was always been a dream of mine to do voiceover work for a cartoon. So that was a good,
Mm-hmm.
good way JP Holding could help me out, and the way
Yeah.
I could help him out too with it. Um, I played as a snake on called Snakey's Cafe,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember it was a little bit difficult because I had to keep having a sort of sound where like the typical Disney sort of snake. So that was a bit difficult
Mm-hmm.
to pull off at first, but I got the hang of it. Now,
Mm-hmm.
how long have you known that you were autistic?
I think it was diagnosed when I was 10 years old. Of course, at that age, it didn't really mean much to me. But as I grew older, I came to understand more and more about it. And in some ways, I've come to see it as kind of a gift for me. It allows me to see the world through a different perspective. And I really like that perspective. Of course, there are some difficulties, as there are with any condition, but it's too easy for people to look at this like it's some kind of death sentence. I have a friend who I went to Bible college with, and we've maintained a very close friendship. And he called me once several years ago because he found out his son was on the spectrum. And I don't say this story to brag about me, but just to make a point, because so many people, when he talked to them, he said they practically treated it like it was cancer. Like, oh, we're so sorry, we're so sorry. And he contacted me and he said, what do I do? I said, well, first, get on your knees and thank God, because you are going to get to see the world through a whole new set of eyes when you see it through the eyes of your son. And talked about how this is going to be something that's going to make him appreciate the world in a different way and see things differently. And that's the comment that stuck with him the most. Because everyone else was so doom and gloom about it. And I was saying, hey, this could be a good thing. I mean, yeah, there's going to be challenges, but you can handle it and you're going to get to see the world in a whole new way.
Yeah, that is a bit of a thing that I hear all the time when it comes to autism. I hear a lot about the stigma of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's
Yeah.
basically entire fields of psychology dedicated to studying autism specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, personally for myself, I wasn't diagnosed until I was like 18.
Mm.
You know, and the reason why I got diagnosed is because I got put into a mental institution,
Mm.
and they diagnosed me from there. And so, you can't, so I can't say I had, as much of a good experience receiving the news.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but, I do think there is a bit of truth in that. Like you said, that you see the world through a whole new different lens. I
Mm-hmm.
was wondering if this was the same for you, but do you tend to take words more literally than other people? Like sort of like Drax uh from Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh yes. Yes. It can be a real struggle sometimes. If I'm at the workplace, for instance, sometimes people can be using figures of speech and I don't even recognize it. I remember growing up, my parents would sometimes talk about things like shows that were playing on Broadway at the time. And it always confused me because about 20 minutes or so from where we lived, there was a street in town called Broadway. I was like, I never see any of these things going on down there. Why is that? Or I'd see all these commercials that said, don't drink and drive. I thought, well, I don't know why my dad's ignoring these commercials because he's drinking coffee while he drives. So doesn't he know he's not supposed to drink and drive?
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
mean,
I went through that.
well, yeah, I mean, to me, what's so funny about that is like I'm completely on the same sort of thing. Although I've
Hmm?
actually made more of a career out of it when it comes to joking with it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember it was a real struggle for me initially, but I took that and incorporated that into my sort of jokes.
Right.
Um, so that's a way of using a disadvantage as an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
I remember what was funny for a funny example for me is when my family told me that they were going to take me to church, and the church was called the Church Without Walls. And my first response to them was, well, if the church has no walls, what keeps up the roof? And that, so that was sort of my thing because I'm like, and also what I would do is I would literally go through idioms and, I would say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, um, like, for example, the whole phrase, it came out of the horse's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, basically, it's supposed to mean that, like, it's the original source and it's the most reliable. It came straight from the horse's mouth. And I just thought, that's stupid because horses can't speak human. So,
One of the things that I like to do that way in a joking manner is people come to me and they just speak casually and say, "Hey, what's up?" And I say, "The opposite of down, birds in flight, a direction, a two-letter word that starts with a U and ends with a P," and keep going on and on. Or
Yeah.
use a joke where,
Another funny one for me was someone would say, "What's on your mind?" And I said, "My skull."
or yeah, or also if someone says, "Well, I went to see this movie with Ben Affleck," and says, "Oh, cool, you sat next to him?"
Mm. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I mean, that's just a common thing with autism. Like, that's why I think when we see Guardians of the Galaxy and we see Drax, we said, "Hey, Drax is just autistic. He's not an alien."
Mm-hmm.
So, I always found that funny. How, like, I think Dave Bautista must have been studying autistics to get into his role of Drax.
Now, some of those things I do, those are kind of like little jokes I've picked up along the way from other sources, but it does show me the fun sometimes of taking things literally.
Mhm. Although, you know, a thing that I actually learned about you from JP Holding through me and JP Holding's conversations is that you're actually trying to think, you're a theistic evolutionist, I believe.
I don't claim that title yet. You see, the thing is, I am open to what's called evolutionary creationism.
Uh,
But the thing is, I've never studied the issue thoroughly, and I don't claim to be a scientist or play one on TV, so I will say neither yay or nay on that one. But if
uh,
I woke up tomorrow and saw a newspaper headline that says Southern Baptist Convention accepts macroevolutionary theory as fact, I'd say cool and go about my day. If I saw one instead that said National Academy of Sciences declares evolution to be junk science, I'd say cool and go about my day. It wouldn't change my interpretation of Genesis. It wouldn't change my view of inerrancy. It wouldn't change my theistic arguments. It wouldn't change my case for the resurrection of Jesus. And in fact, I like to have some fun with it because atheists can then try and argue against me by pointing out evolution. I'll say, okay, just for the sake of an argument, I'm granting you evolution. I really don't care. Now, please give me your real argument.
yeah. I remember, I mean, the only person I think that has tried to make an argument for atheism from evolution is Paul Draper, Professor Paul Draper. Um, he's an agnostic philosopher,
Mm-hmm.
and he made an argument, show like an inductive argument, where he tried to say that you know the naturalistic world is more likely to be compatible with evolution than Christianity.
I mean, that's also something when we say the naturalistic world. I don't speak that way either. I make it a point to not use words like natural and supernatural in that sense.
Mm.
Because I think you're kind of doing the atheist work for them at that point, where you kind of look and say, well, sure, okay, the natural world could exist on its own here, but let's go and argue for something else we're going to call the supernatural world. And I really don't think that approach works. I, I don't grant the natural world can exist on its own. I don't think many of us would say that, but that's kind of what we're granting our opponents when we do that. And
Mhm.
so that's to go and say, okay, first off, I want you to demonstrate to me on what basis not just does a natural world come into existence, but how does it continue to exist? Is it something inherent in itself, or does it depend on something else? And instead of saying something supernatural, I speak instead of something being extra material.
Mm.
So I will speak of something like, say, numbers. or goodness, or triangularity, or even, and this one sounds like a shock to a lot of people, but it's entirely true, even existence itself. Because I could go to you and say, okay, you believe that things exist. Good. Okay. Can you take some existence and put it in a jar for me so I can study it? And you can't do that kind of thing. Existence
Yeah.
doesn't work that way.
That's
But
like
we
a
are,
metaphysical statement.
yeah.
So,
And
you
so
know, that would, I
that's the
mean,
kind of thing I
yeah.
do.
Mhm. Well, I mean, generally with most atheists, they tend, even though they don't know the concepts, they accept the philosophy of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's metaphysical functionalism, which basically means you can define everything by its function.
Mm-hmm.
You like, you know, what it does is what it is. Like it basically says that there's no intrinsic property of things, only extrinsic.
Yeah, color me skeptical, that thing goes there. Some things I find very difficult to put in that category. Goodness, beauty, existence itself. I mean, what does existence do? Because there are so many different things that exist.
Mhm,
It's really a difficult category to put things in.
mhm. Yeah. I mean, a thing that I also like to think about is, you know, I actually looked up some I wouldn't call it necessarily statistics, but you know, some psychological, you know, some psychological data from studies of autistic people. And, you know, it showed that autistic people are more likely to be atheists than the general population.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I always wondered, what do you think of that?
Well, I remember having a discussion earlier this year with someone who's a sweet girl, says she's kind of like a Christian agnostic studying theology in England. Wrote a very good book when she was 14, Lisa's Avenger. That, I mean, it's a book by a 14-year-old, so we're not talking C.S. Lewis level or anything, but it's still pretty good. And we both came from very opposite perspectives, where she said, you know, faith, being on the spectrum, it makes it hard to be a Christian because faith is such an emotional kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I said, that's odd. I see it the exact same opposite way, because for me, being on the spectrum makes it easy to be a Christian because we tend to think much more rationally and realistically. And so we can examine the evidence and arguments, and our emotions don't usually get in the way.
Well, you know, to me, what I personally think it comes down to, and even some psychologists have pointed out, it's because autistic people, like God is, in most conceptions, at least in the West, God is a personal being. And autistic people notoriously have a difficult time recognizing persons
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or understanding persons.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, if an autistic person has trouble understanding just regular people off the bat,
Oh, yes.
then you're telling them, oh, well, there's this other, even greater being that's also a person in there. And I think, you know, for many autistic people, it's sort of a concept that they can't personally get because they don't have that recognition. Like it's an abstract concept to them.
And add in for us in a Christian story, not only are we talking about a personal being, we are talking about a tri-personal being. And that makes it even more difficult. And I think, as someone on the spectrum, prayer can be really difficult for me sometimes, because it's hard enough to talk to someone who's face to face with me.
Mhm.
How do you talk to someone you can't even see?
Mhm.
That's a challenge. And then I think there's so much pop Christianity mixed in with this, where we have this idea where you need to listen back to what God is telling you. And I'm thinking, where is that in Scripture?
Mhm.
Because Jesus tells us how to pray in Matthew 6, and yet never once says, now once you're done praying, you stop and listen to hear what's being said to you. It's never said like that.
Well,
And
yeah. I mean, well, just remember, Jesus said that if you pray for God to give you a car, then God has to give you a car.
got that kind of thing.
I actually seen the video that you and JP Holding did on that, which was funny.
Mm-hmm.
Where you guys went into the patron relationship between God and prayer.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty much an interesting concept when you look at God as a patron. I think it also
Mm-hmm.
makes sense to think of Moses, pretty much bargaining with God, for the in the Sodom and Gomorrah episode. Because when you think of God as a patron,
It's
you're
Abraham, not
a
Moses.
usurper trying to bargain with him, which is something that you would do to a patron.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting. Well, I've got when I started looking at JP's material, it started me looking into honor and shame in the biblical world. Is that I think being on the spectrum, we typically do think naturally in terms of honor and shame. And we
Mhm.
talk about our trust relationships with various people, and we see how much they measure up. And if someone is trustworthy to me, I will give them great honor and be extremely loyal to them. But if someone becomes untrustworthy, then I really won't want anything to do with them.
Well, and another thing I think that makes it hard for autistic people to believe in God is that, at least in Christian, in the West with Christianity and even with Islam, and you can argue Judaism as well. Basically, it's the notion that God is a relation, gives a relationship to people. Well, autistic people have a hard enough time understanding regular relationships, how they work,
Exactly.
how they form, and then you're asking them to have a relationship with something, as you said, they can't see, and it's not like they can
Uh-huh.
tell anything.
Yep.
So I think that adds a whole bit on it. So I'm not quite surprised. Um, Personally, I think that what I mean, so you know, I've actually when I interviewed JP Holding, I asked him this question. I asked him, I mean, what do you think, is causing like the decline in the church, and what do you think the church could do to, repair itself?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was asking the question like, the church has been in decline for a while. What do you think the church can do in order to remedy that?
Well, if you're asking me what happened, I think largely we tended to forget the academy and we've turned Christianity into an emotional experience. And Christianity then becomes a way to get what you want to fix your life, as it were. And then now, to some extent, that is true. I mean, Christianity does offer great solace if you're suffering. It does offer ways to help with pain that you're going through. If you're struggling with addictions or something like that, yeah, Christianity can help you overcome that. If you struggle with depression and anxiety, yes, it can help you. I'm not saying it's a cure for difficulties, because some struggles you're going to have forever to the day you die. But it can help you. But that makes Christianity sometimes be an all about me religion. The first question we should be asked about Christianity is not, does it help me? It should be, is it true? And if it's true, you should believe it whether it helps you or not. Unfortunately, we've based everything on that emotional experience, and not everyone has a really strong emotional experience with Christianity. I mean, there have been times in my life where I've had strong emotions about Christianity, but those times are the exception, not the norm. And I think for most relationships, that's the way it is. I mean, you talk about a couple that's been married for many, many years. And C.S. Lewis says that when you first fall in love with someone, you have kind of a feeling where you can hardly sleep at night and you're so excited thinking about this person. He said, if that kind of feeling lasted forever, you could never function at all. It fades. And it's a good thing, it does, but it doesn't mean the love that you have for a person fades. It just means it changes into something, and that something is usually deeper and not centered on your emotions. So I'm not surprised when, for many people, Christianity can start with a strong emotional experience. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but we also need to get people to realize that that emotional experience will eventually fade. And that's okay. That's moving you actually into a deeper walk at that point.
I see you plugged your stuff.
What?
Is that a subtle reference to your podcast, Deeper Waters?
I actually hadn't even thought about it that way, but I guess it works. No, that wasn't something intentional.
Yeah, because that's what I thought. I thought that was what you were doing.
No, it wasn't, but it works that way. It, in this case, actually is a happy coincidence.
Yeah, I think that personally, I think, you basically said it. I think the problem with the church nowadays is that it's very anti-intellectualism,
Yep.
and people are very individualistic. They more favor, their own gratification over community.
Yep.
And J.P. Olding actually goes over this when he talks about the death of expertise, where people are rejecting authority outright. So, and this has a funny coincidence, is because on one hand, you'll get atheists from this because they're rejecting, obviously, their priest and their parents, who are more often than not religious. And on the other hand, you'll also get flat earthers who reject science. So, you do sort of get the same phenomenon, out of that. It's neat to know how these things link up. So personally, I think a thing that I try to work on myself is I'm a men's rights guy. I told you that before on Facebook. I try to work on, fixing, trying to help guys out, try to, handle the legal issues that men get, and try to be a friend that helps them through difficult times. It's it hasn't been easy for men in modern America for a while.
One of the most fascinating books I've read as a man is by, I think his name was David Murrow. It's called Why Men Hate Going to Church. And I found it extremely accurate.
Is it because they have to give the priest money?
No, it's because the church has been very much highly feminized in many ways. And being a man is not really accepted. I mean, Jesus is not usually seen as a masculine figure in many cases. Many of the songs that you can sing in a church service, they sound like what a girl would say to her boyfriend. It doesn't connect with men. The issues men struggle with, that men wonder about, they're not talked about in church services. And I was at a group tonight, and we were talking about this kind of thing. And statistically, we're told that 1 in 3 men in the church struggles with internet pornography. I actually think it's more like 2 in 3 men, probably in the church, struggle, and the rest are just lying about it. But I mean, seriously, it's so common in the church. But here's the thing: when was the last time you heard a sermon on that topic? I can't think of the last time I heard a sermon on the topic. Well, maybe one time back when I was in seminary, around 10 years or over a decade or so ago, I think I heard a sermon about sexual ethics in church. But no, you don't hear about that kind of topic. And usually all you hear about is how you can go and be a nice person, where men don't care about being nice, because as we know, nice guys finish last.
Mhm.
I mean, if you talked about the topics that were relevant to men, you would get men coming to church more often. And the benefit of that is usually if you want to reach a family for Christ, the best way to do that is to start by reaching a father in the home. And usually most of the others will follow. It doesn't happen as often if you get the other family members. But if you can get the dad become a Christian, a lot of times the others are more prone to follow. So men hate going to church because church is just so highly emotional most of the time and highly focused on relationships more and more, instead of the way that men think. Men don't really think about relationships the same way others do, and definitely not men on the spectrum.
Mhm.
The church has to start speaking to people on the spectrum, and it has to start speaking to men, especially.
Yeah, I completely agree. Um, I think, it's also with men is that, like, because church, like when you said it's been feminized, like, because men are typically very active, they get a lot out of kinetic
Oh
learning.
yeah, yep,
And in church, all they have you do is just sit down and listen to someone read you the Bible.
yep.
I mean, how is a man supposed to really engage with that?
Yeah, I mean, consider that's the exact same problem we even have in the school system. The school system can be very feminine as well. You go and sit in a desk the whole time. A man hates that for the most part. Many men would prefer to be out there active, doing something. Even someone like myself who isn't very physically active, when I am usually sitting for a long time, what am I doing? Playing a game where I'm acting, doing something. That makes sense to me.
Mhm. Yeah, that is a big problem, and a big problem with, you know, with autistic people especially is that, we have a thing. There is a thing called masking. I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
I'd like you to explain it to make sure we're on the same terms. I think it's kind of
Yeah,
you
well,
act based
masking.
on what you see.
All right, so masking, to put it simply, is when autistic people try to take on the traits of neurotypical people to
Mm-hmm.
blend in.
Yep.
So that's what they call it, masking, because you're basically you're trying to put on the normal hat
Mm-hmm.
or the normal mask in order to go out into society.
Mm-hmm.
And many psychologists will say that's an awful thing for autistic people to do because it becomes an obsession at some point of trying to appear normal.
Now,
And
on my end, I don't try to appear normal, really, but I would say, yeah, there are certain traits, personality skills that I do emulate. Sometimes it's from other people that I know, sometimes it's from a character in a television show, for example. Or if I read something by an author, I can start thinking in a way that I think kind of mirrors the way that author thinks, if I really like what I'm reading.
Mhm.
And to some extent, I think we all do this. I mean, every single one of us is influenced by other people to some way. But I've I've personally got no wish to appear normal. If anything, I like being different and standing out. I don't want to blend in.
Yeah, it's a common thing that autistic people do tend to go through, sadly enough, and it contributes to a high suicide rate that sadly our fellow Aspie people go through. Eh, and I always just found it funny because, well, I mean, not funny in the hot way, but funny in the sort of, dubious way where, we put so much emphasis in culture on transgender issues because of their high suicide rate. But I mean, we have mentally ill people that have close to, if not higher, suicide rates, and we do nothing to address it. So it seems like they're giving certain privileges to certain people while leaving out other people.
Yeah, come April, we have Autism Awareness Month, which I prefer that title, just saying, just be aware of the people around you. But when you get to June, it becomes Gay Pride, where everyone says, no, you have to celebrate our difference. You have to celebrate the way we are. And no, I'm not celebrating that. That doesn't make sense to me. Any more than I think Straight Pride Month would make sense at all. And yeah, the autistic community, we're a much greater population out there. And the reason we're not championed so much is it's not politically advantageous to us. I mean, there are some ways that we do get seen out there. I mean, you look at TV shows like, say, The Good Doctor, for example. And yeah, autistic people are getting more noticed out there, but you're not going to become like some famous rock star type personality. You come out and say you're autistic. You come out and you say you're transgender. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Everyone loves you. Come out and say you're autistic. Oh, good for you. Good for you.
Yeah, I mean, the most popular autistic person that's currently alive is Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm.
He personally came out as autistic during Saturday Night Live. So I was personally happy by that because it said to me, all right, maybe we're going to actually get this stuff out there more and actually get something done. Because I mean, for one, as not necessarily an as like an ASCII supporter. I mean, I do have to somewhat support, my own community of people with autism, but it's also just the fact that more like autism tends to be more in men than women.
Mm-hmm. Well,
At least.
I do know some. It's harder to demonstrate in women because I think the original subjects for study were all men. But I've got some friends who are husband and wife. They have multiple children. All of them are on the spectrum. The husband, the wife, the children. As far as we know, all of them on the spectrum. So it happens that there are women out there who are on the spectrum. They need to be recognized a whole lot more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course they they exist, but I'm just saying like they've said something about men's brains being
Mm-hmm.
sort of more conducive to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so as a guy that's into men's rights, having, going into the autism stuff is a big thing because men in general have a high suicide rate,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very, you know, it's just very strange to me about how society can say men are privileged, but yet they're the ones that kill themselves more in society.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how? I mean, that's the opposite of feeling privileged.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I try to handle that sort of stuff. And it also helps being autistic because it does sort of force me to talk to people. Because it forces me to talk to people, get to know people, practice my verbal communication skills,
Mm-hmm.
and I get to be better from it. I remember, like, the only reason why I can talk to you the way I'm talking to you now is because I had intense therapy, for some years. Um, and that had to help me with my communication skills and learn to talk better. Before, I couldn't really get words out coherently. And so, I mean, I could get out some sentences, but I couldn't really have a conversation. Uh, so I think, so how did you get into Christian apologetics?
Okay. Well, when I graduated from high school, I really wasn't sure what to do with my life. And I was actually at that time in a time of dark depression and anxiety.
Mm.
By the grace of God, I made it through that time, but it was extremely rough. But we were trying to decide what to do with my life. And Bible college came to mind because I knew the Bible extremely well, and I'd wanted to be a preacher at one point. And so I decided to go to Bible college. And one day, very uncharacteristic of me, I go to a student down the lobby in our college who's studying something. I say, "What are you studying?" "Apologetics." "What's that?" I honestly didn't know. So he tells me, file that away back in my mind. And I'm also on the internet at this time, dialoguing, and when atheists come in the room, I have nothing to say. I don't know how to answer them. And someone recommends I read this book, Morgan the Carpenter, by Josh McDowell. First, when I read on the topic, I thought it was really good. But then I remembered someone told me about this book. It was called The Case for Christ by this guy named Lee Strobel, who was a journalist and set out to disprove Christianity, ended up becoming a Christian. I read that book, and I call that book the book that lit my fire. And from that point on, I lived with my folks at home, and my mother was kind of panicking every time I went out to the bookstore because I came out with more and more books, and she's like, "How are we going to have room to put these anywhere?" But I've kept shopping for books over and over, and I've been reading this kind of material ever since then.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Me and you both have a love for books. I personally have my own library in my
Mm-hmm.
house. I bought myself a shelf and I keep all my books on it. I recently got two more books recently that I ordered from Amazon. Both political books. You know, I I did I'm also an author myself. I believe you wrote books too as well, or you contributed to a book.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was called Defining Inherency.
Yes, that's one of them.
Mm. So for the laymen out there, what's your conception of inerrancy?
My conception of inerrancy is the Bible is true in everything that it teaches.
Hmm.
It's very simple.
That's nice. I mean,
And
'cause I know that.
consider, for instance, the Bible records the lies of the devil. That doesn't mean those lies are true. It means the Bible recognizes that they were truly said.
Yeah, and I remember. I mean, what's funny that a book that I actually wrote myself was called basically debunking this site called evilbible.com.
Mm-hmm.
It's a site ran by a liberal atheist,
Mm-hmm.
and it sort of goes out of its way to be as stupid as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously you don't see any footnotes or any references in a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
articles. So you can tell that the person is not really doing their due diligence when it comes to understanding complex ethical issues in the Bible. Like, for example, don't you know that God commanded, commanded his people to commit genocide against the Canaanites?
Yeah, I know about that kind of thing.
Yeah. Or, basically God, said it was, or, I'm trying to think, oh yeah, the bitter waters thing where God says that he'll cause a woman to be infertile and kill their unborn child if they were an adulterer.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the kind of questions these are the sort of things from the Bible that atheists really go over a lot, but they don't really provide any sources or anywhere where they get their information from.
Mm-hmm.
So it reads more like a personal blog than it does about anything that's trying to be factual.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but don't you know, Nick, that God promoted slavery?
Yeah, I've heard all of these before.
You can also hear this neat track by atheists. If God created the universe, then what created God?
Yeah.
You know, it's a basic common trope. Have you ever heard of the atheist site called Atheist Republic?
Oh gosh, yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of obsessed with them at this point in my life. I mean, I go out of my way sometimes to just see their articles that they post up, and I'm like, oh my God, you guys really don't know what you're talking about. And I'll leave criticisms in there. And what's funny is I've actually gone out my way to buy some of the books they sell. And I read them, and let me tell you, the amount of stupidity that I've read in some of these books is like they're literally some of the most awful books I've ever read in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like I I've gotten more entertainment watching, listen reading about medieval torture than reading these books.
I thought reading those books was medieval torture.
Yeah, I sort of felt, the only one that ever did any like the I think the smartest person out of the bunch that really seen was their founder Armin Nabati, and his book Why There Is No God, which is a mistitle because he never actually gives an argument for why there is no God. He just more or less gives, responses to theistic arguments. And he doesn't seem to know the difference between the two.
I don't remember if I've read that one or not. I might have. I don't remember for sure.
You can get it for free online.
Yeah, I've got a whole lot of books already waiting to
Yeah.
be read.
Well,
So.
I got it for free. I got it for free online. I still think I paid too much.
Yeah, probably that. I I have a Kindle, so I buy a lot of Kindle books as well, and that keeps a lot of my time going. But that's fine. I carry my Kindle with me practically everywhere.
Uh, like I remember one of the books I read from them was they basically spent a whole book talking about God as a sky wizard. And I'm like, am I sure that this guy is an adult and not like a 10-year-old that's pretending to be an adult? Like, this is like level one stuff, and they're not getting past it. Um, what I also like to talk to you is I believe you've been in a debates before.
Yes.
I believe one guy you debated was named Dan Barker.
Yep. That was
How
a
did that
live
go?
debate done before an audience.
How did that debate go?
I thought it went excellently. That I've debated people like Dan Barker for years online, and I found his arguments to largely be highly emotional and full of rhetoric. And I think I was able to go through a lot of it. I think his great weak point was, for instance, when he said 2 + 2 = 4 was not true in the time of the dinosaurs. You try to say, okay, where I can always go back and say, if that's the case, then what you are saying is really there is no objective truth apart from a human mind. And that would ultimately mean that all our truths are subjective, including your claims about how much you think God is such an evil person, an evil being out there. So really, there's no reason to believe anything you're saying because it's not objectively true. It's just your personal opinion. I mean, this is the kind of way that he gets in. Dan Barker he never gave up his fundamentalism. He still has it.
Well, yeah, he went from being an overly emotional piano playing priest to an overly emotional piano playing atheist.
Mhm. His mindset sadly never changed. It was just his loyalty.
Oh, that's some good stuff.
He's got a story in one of his books where he's driving with his brother, and his brother sees a mountain range, for instance, says, "Isn't it incredible how God created this mountain range?" Goes on and on about that. And Dan Barker goes on to says, "Isn't it incredible?" And he gives a whole scientific process for how mountains came to be. And his brother says, "You just have to ruin everything," that kind of thing. And I'm reading that, I'm thinking, why not both? So Dan Barker can tell me how a mountain range can come to be scientifically. Okay. How does that go against theism? That doesn't mean God doesn't use the natural process, as it's so called. I mean, we hold, for instance, that based on passages like, say, Psalm 139, that we're knit together in our mother's womb. But that doesn't mean there isn't a step-by-step scientific process that is used to make a human life. And I'm not just talking about a couple having sex together. I'm saying even beyond that. After that, a baby isn't just created fiat in a mother's womb, unless it's for virgin birth, which I do affirm. But other than that, there is a typically 9-month process. And just because it's a process step by step doesn't mean God isn't in it.
Yeah. I mean, was it hard for you to wrap your mind around the concept of miracles?
Nope.
Yeah. I mean, that was something that troubled me a bit more. Although I think that had more to do with how I conceptualized God, because I was one of the people that had a hard time recognizing God as a person. And
I think for me, it was kind of easy in some ways, because like I said, I grew up and I'm still largely a part of the gaming field. And so when you play games that involve fantasy elements, you're not really surprised when you come across miracles. Often, I'm not saying miracles are fantasy, but I am saying that you're used to things being outside of this world, as it were. You're used to incredible things happening. And I had no problem with that kind of thing then. But yeah, I can accept miracles because, like C.S. Lewis says, if there is a God, then miracles are pretty much part of it, the whole thing. You have to accept them.
I remember, well, just remember that you accept that on faith, which means faith is believing what you know ain't so.
That's Peter Boghossian's definition. I've got a whole article on my
No, that's
blog.
actually Mark Twain's.
Well, it's also Peter Boghossian's as well. I've got a whole thing on my blog about what faith means. It never means, in the biblical sense, blind belief. It's more a trust in what has been shown to be reliable. There's a guy who wrote a whole book on the meaning of faith. I think David Gupta is his name, and it's an incredible read. He wrote because he heard his students at a seminary talking about faith and using that false idea of what it is.
Yeah, I remember. Well, we're coming up on the hour. We're coming close to the hour mark. You know, so I'm going to ask one little more question, and we can go from there. The question is: does the power of Christ compel you?
I'm sorry, you broke up quite a bit, but I couldn't really understand you.
I said, my follow-up question is: does the power of Christ compel you?
I don't know what you mean by it. I mean, I've heard that saying before, but I can't tell you where it comes from or what it means exactly.
It comes from The Exorcist. I have a tradition where I do that sort of thing. Christians are on the show, because it's sort of a thing that priest, in the Exorcist movie, when they're trying to exorcise the demon from the girl, that they say the power of Christ compels you over and over again. So I try to get Christians to say yes, and I try to go, oh, it's the same as the devil with you.
Oh.
Well, that, and I also think, I also, for that reason, and two, I also hope that they get the reference. Because I think I'm a horror movie fan and I love The Exorcist. I also do it as a way because I think it, it's very often Christians will go into their faith from it. And, I get to hear a little bit more about what they believe. But anyway, we come up on the hour mark. Is there any projects that you would like the audience to know about and where they can find you?
Well, you can find me at deeperwatersapologetics.com. And I'm working on a YouTube channel more and more. I'm going the next thing I need to do is find someone who's very skilled at YouTube. I've got someone who's offered to do that for me with video editing and things like that, but I haven't heard from him in a while, so I don't know how that's going. But yeah, because I was told by someone, you don't need to learn video editing yourself, just focus on what you do and find someone who can do that for you. I am doing research on a book on virgin birth, which I do affirm. So I hope that will be coming out sometime, maybe next year or so. I do have a Patreon, and I definitely need support there, especially since I'm going to be going back to school and I need to be paying for things. So if anyone wants to help support my education, that'd be great. So that's pretty much what I'm doing nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, make sure to check out Nick Peters and check out his work on Tech Talk TV. And this is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.